All right, so today we're talking about disputing Walmart AP deductions, and we are joined by two special guests, SupplyPike's very own Eric Smith and Weston Parks. Eric serves as our Director of Product and has been at SupplyPike for roughly 6 years. Weston is the Product Manager of our Deductions Navigator Walmart team. Both Eric and Weston have spent countless hours entrenched in research on the pain points of AP deduction process for CPG suppliers and are always looking for ways to improve the experience of our SupplyPike users. And correct me if I'm wrong, both Eric and Weston, but if you guys aren't building products for SupplyPike, could I bet that I could find you both either gravel or mountain biking in Northwest Arkansas trails?
That is true. That is true. Weston is a former bike industry insider.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the real deal.
Now I just ride on the weekends.
Well, you guys can definitely ask questions about AP deductions, and these are also some mountain biking, gravel biking experts. So you can put some of those in there too.
Yeah, we just talk about bikes today. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's forget about AP deductions. That's not as fun. No, in all seriousness, today's conversation, we're covering a couple different things. First, we're going to start by talking about how your team should prepare for the end of Walmart settlement dispute by providing a quick recap on what that entails. Then Eric and Weston are going to spell out what it actually means for suppliers once settlement disputing is gone. Then they're going to go on to cover how to prepare for this change based on their research and the tips from fellow suppliers that we've accumulated when talking to our customers. And then we'll kind of end on reframing this major change as a strategic opportunity for your teams to improve the deduction process moving forward. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end, and we're going to give a quick preview of what SupplyPike's disputing solution, Deductions Navigator Walmart, looks like. And then just a couple of housekeeping things I want to cover. If you've never been on one of our webinars or one of our online in-person events, we will be sending a copy of the slide deck out to your emails, and you will also get a recording of today's presentation. So don't feel like you have to take copious notes or take screenshots. You can do both of those things, but we've got you covered. We're going to give you the recap here in a couple of days. And then this is probably the most important thing to make sure your questions get answered. If you're on Zoom, you'll go down to your little panel of options at the bottom, and there's a button that has two speech bubbles that says Q&A. That is the best way to ask a question, because if you go to the one bubble that says chat, that's really great for sharing insights or commenting on what Eric and Eric and Weston are talking about. So that's great for, kind of just being a part of the conversation. However, if you ask a question in there, it's probably going to get lost. So just stick to the Q&A bubble, and that will stay on Eric and Weston's screens. And then lastly, before I hand it off to Eric, if you haven't been formally introduced to us, we are SupplyPike. We're a Northwest Arkansas software company, and we create cloud-based tools that help CPG partners reduce their revenue by detecting and resolving retail compliance issues like AP deductions, what we're talking about today, but as well as OTIF and soon to come other compliance programs like SQEP. Today, we are focusing on Walmart's compliance programs and deductions, but SupplyPike does offer solutions for other major retailers like Target, Kroger, and Amazon. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Eric, to kick off today's conversation.
All right, thanks, Allie. And hey, everyone, really excited to dive in this morning. I'm a little bit bummed out that we're not able to do this one in person. I was really looking forward to that, especially because I heard that there was going to be Chick-fil-A there. And I'm a big fan of chicken minis, but there will be another one. We'll meet in person again soon when the weather's not so icy. But yeah, like Allie said, the topic for today is Walmart's transition from their settlement program and into the future. And we're going to dive into what that looks like. Before we dive in, I always like to start with this, and this is just a disclaimer for those of you who may not be as familiar with SupplyPike and Supplierwiki. But we are an independent company. We build software for Walmart and Target and Amazon and Kroger suppliers to use to make it easier to manage their business at those retailers. We are not Walmart. We don't speak authoritatively on behalf of Walmart. So the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is drawn from Walmart's official publications, what they have announced officially, as well as the data that we see from working with nearly 400 different Walmart suppliers. So a lot of insight that we have from our position working across every category in Walmart with a huge number of suppliers, but we aren't Walmart. So with that said, Weston and I, as we go through this, we'll be asking questions of you guys in the chat. We always love to hear what you guys are seeing out there in the world. Y'all are absolutely in the trenches and doing this every day. So feel free to share your insights, use the chat, use the Q&A. We want to build this community where we all improve together. So just a little disclaimer before we dive in. And yeah, let's get going. So like Ali said, we're going to start with a recap of settlement disputing in general. For those of you who have never done a settlement, you guys are already disputing the way that Walmart expects in the future. For those of you who are currently on settlement or just coming off of settlement, we'll do a quick recap as well, but just kind of setting the playing field here. One thing we always like to start with is just kind of some definitions. In the 5+ years that we've been doing this from a software perspective, we always hear different terminology for, what is a deduction? What is a fine? What is an audit? So to make sure for at least today that we're all speaking the same language, when we're talking about deductions here at SupplyPike in the context of Walmart, what we mean are Walmart's accounts payable deductions that are withheld from your invoices. So these are shortages like codes 22, 24, 25 that everybody's familiar with. Deductions are that kind of bucket. These things can be disputed. We're going to go deep into that today. But those typically we call deductions or claims. Contrast that with compliance fines. These are fines, kind of punitive fines to the supplier. Things like Walmart's On Time in Full program or Supplier Quality Excellence program. Those are compliance programs. So they're not necessarily taken from an invoice like at the time of payment, but they're fines for failure to comply at some point during the order to cash process. And lastly, audits. Audits are retroactive. They can look at just about any part of your business, and those typically come from either Walmart directly or one of their third-party audit firms. So that's kind of another bucket altogether as well. So a little bit of definitions before we dive in today. So as we're talking about settlement, we are going to be talking about that first column on the left, deductions from your invoices. And that's kind of our world for today. So historically, there were kind of two ways to deal with these types of deductions. You could dispute them individually through a process that we'll dive into here in a minute. But Walmart also offered a settlement program to certain suppliers. So settlement was designed to help suppliers, especially usually a little bit larger suppliers, deal with just the crush of volume of deductions that came across because it could be so tedious to dispute those deductions one by one by one. Settlement was a way for both sides to kind of come together and the supplier to say, hey, you owe me $500,000, and Walmart to say, hey, we'll pay you $300,000, and you shake hands and you call it good and you all walk away. And it was designed to sort of negotiate that repayment in a little bit more expeditious manner. So historically, settlement has always applied only to certain types of deductions. Typically, those are you can see the codes there at the bottom of the slide. Those were your shortages, damages, no goods received, like codes 22, 24, 25, 28, and a couple other oddballs like code 30 for sending duplicate invoices and code 87, which could be just about anything with the other description. But that was kind of the settlement world. It was, hey, let's shake hands. Let's not either of us spend too much time disputing or reviewing disputes, and let's just kind of meet in the middle and move on with our lives. So like I said, it applied to certain scenarios, not all. We went through those certain types of deductions that settlement applies to. Certain suppliers wouldn't qualify for settlement either. So if you were Walmart Canada, you probably weren't doing settlements with Walmart. And if you were your direct import business, probably wasn't handled by settlement either. And then every other type of deduction or claim or chargeback, besides the ones that we just mentioned, weren't included in settlement. So, that's a quick overview of how that settlement program worked. Obviously, here in a minute, Weston's going to dive into Walmart's announcement that settlement is going away and not going to be an option anymore, and what the future looks like. But kind of a recap. So, SupplyPike here, we've worked with, like I said, hundreds of suppliers at Walmart, and many of those at one point were on settlement or were in the process of moving off, or some decided to stay on. And there were a couple scenarios where we saw settlement disputing actually be kind of beneficial. Some of the pros of settlement disputing, one, some suppliers saw 70% or so payback. We'd hear the story every now and then of some suppliers getting a settlement paid back 90% of what they asked for. That was a little bit more rare, but 50% was pretty common on the low end, and sometimes up into the 70s. So you ask for $1 million back and you get $700,000 back. For a handshake deal, that wasn't too bad. And you didn't have to go deep into the weeds for every single deduction and provide proof for why each of those thousands potentially of deductions were not valid. So for suppliers who didn't have great access to documentation to prove why a deduction might not be valid, like a shipping document, settlement could sometimes be a preferable option for them because they wouldn't be able to prove individual deductions were invalid to begin with. So let's shake hands and take what we can get. But that's a quick review of the settlement program. Weston's going to dive into kind of what the future looks like. So obviously we're here today because Walmart has announced that settlement program is going away. And yeah, Weston, I'll hand it off to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Eric. So with that in mind, that was a little context of what settlement was. Now we're going to talk about what we can expect in the future. So with settlement going away, what exactly is Walmart's replacement for that? So what the future looks like once Walmart's basically, yes, so here we go. History of about a little over a year of what Walmart's been doing is back in September of 2021, Walmart shifted towards APDP, that's Accounts Payable Disputing Portal. And so what that means, this was Walmart's replacement for direct commerce, if any of you guys are familiar with that. So that was when Walmart rolled out their new disputing portal for individual disputing. And then, so, through September 2021 through, still currently, they're working on making it a little better, a better disputing process. And then what we saw in October of 2022, so not that long ago, was Walmart began emailing suppliers saying, hey, FYI, settlement's going away. By May 1st, everyone's going to be switched over to individual disputing. The way that was written, they said that they're going to do it basically in phases. So it's not on May 1st, everyone switched over. What you can expect is Walmart should be in communication with you, but it sounds like some are going to be switched over this month, some February, March, so on and so forth. So long story short, though, is that by May 1st of 2023, all suppliers will move to individual disputing.
And Weston, is it true that we've heard from some suppliers who've already been moved over from settlement to individual disputing?
Yes, some basically wanted to get ahead of the curve and elected to go ahead and get off of settlement and onto individual disputing. And we have heard of, it's been very few that I've talked to that Walmart has forced their hands. So that's a good question. Maybe one or two that we know of, but I haven't heard too many that Walmart has forced them to get off of yet. All right. So kind of circling back here, all right, so that was about the past year or so of what's been going on in the APDP world. So we just want to talk a little bit about APDP specifically. So this disputing portal, like I said, it's what replaced direct commerce back in September of 2021. And this is what you will be moved over to once settlement ends for your company. An important part of APDP that Walmart is really, I guess, highlighting in that letter saying, hey, settlement's ending, is a specific feature in APDP called mass dispute creation. And I think that, it's bulk disputes. And so we can talk more about what that means on the next slide.
And Weston, I guess one thing that I didn't mention that I should have mentioned talking about settlement, historically with Walmart, you had the option to be in one program or the other. So you could either use settlement and only settle, or you could dispute individually through the accounts payable dispute portal, APDP, and go that route. But what they didn't allow was for any specific time period a supplier to be in both programs. So if you were going to be a settlement supplier, you had to be a settlement supplier. If you were going to dispute one by one through APDP, you could not settle. You had to only dispute individually. So a little bit of context there.
Yeah, that's a good call out. We've seen customers on both. Yeah, like you said, settlements takes longer we see longer repayments, but it was a little, I guess, it was less time consuming because you could do it quarterly. Here's all my deductions that I want to dispute. Whereas APDP is that individual disputing is a little more time consuming. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of APDP, of individual disputing. But a little more context about what APDP is specifically. Basically, this is where you come to, it's a retail link app that you can open up. And from here, this is where you're going to see all of your, excuse me, all of your deductions that you can then dispute individually. And from here, you'll also need access to your shipping documents because you will need to, if you're doing individually, you'll have to attach those to these disputes as well. So we can get more into that as well. All right, so kind of what I was referencing there is there's essentially two paths in APDP. Keep in mind, both of these paths are the alternative to settlement. So settlement's going away. You have these two options here that we have laid out. So you can individually dispute one at a time. That's the traditional full dispute we have there. One claim at a time. Supplier, you provide all proof documents needed, that BOL, that POD, any proof that might help your case showing, hey, this is an invalid deduction, please pay me back on this. So it's up to you as a supplier to provide those documents for Walmart to review. So once you attach that and fill all that out in the APDP portal, that's when you dispute these one at a time. And that's when it goes to Genpact, which is a third party Walmart works with for review. And based on that review, it'll either get approved and paid out or denied, where you can try again if you really want to. All right, and then the alternative to that truly one-by-one individual disputing method is the mass dispute creation, MDC, as Walmart calls it. That's also what we referenced. This is more, we like to say, spaghetti at the wall method. This essentially is Walmart's answer to, well, settlement was nice, I could dispute everything from an entire quarter all at once. Are you telling me I have to dispute one at a time now? MDC is supposed to take off some of the heavy lifting from that, where you can select up to 500 claims at a time and dispute those. So pros, it's not all rainbows with MDC. In fact, a lot of these end up still being individually disputed, unfortunately. But what it specifically means is that you can dispute 500 at a time. However, if you use that MDC select all 500 from a 10-day date range, one, there's a lot of noise in there. There's a lot of stuff you probably don't really want to dispute. It's outside the shortage deductions. And also there's going to be, if you use the MDC feature, you can't provide any docs when you dispute those. So you're basically saying dispute with no proof on your end and hoping Walmart pays out on those deductions. It's an automated review, so it doesn't seem to go to Genpact. It is more instance. And if denied, your only course of action is to then essentially pick up where the column on the left is and individually dispute with proof documents. All right, and so we called this number out because with MDC, say you dispute 500 deductions using that mass dispute creation feature. What we've seen by looking at almost 1 million disputes across all of our companies, active companies that use SupplyPike, is that on average, only about 19% of these are going to get auto approved, which is really unfortunate, especially for settlement suppliers who are used to seeing a 70% payout on the settlement docs. What we're seeing is that using this mass dispute feature, only about 19% of those are going to get approved, and the rest, 81%, so you're going to have to provide documents one at a time, unless you used a software provider or a third party to help you with that. So kind of pros and cons here of MDC, mass dispute creation, is that yes, you can dispute 500 at a time to help with some of that heavy lifting. There is some auto approval capability, about 19%, like we said, and it is much faster than settlements. You don't have to wait months and months and months for Walmart to approve your settlement disputing. However, the cons there is that, like we talked about, far less than your normal settlement offers. You're essentially seeing, 70% approval on settlement, all the way down to about 19% on auto approval. And since you can't attach proof documentation in mass, essentially, that means you will have to go look at all of those denied ones, 81%, and attach them one by one. So pros and cons there. All right, and just to kind of summarize specifically the misnomer with MDC, is that it kind of sounds like the answer for settlement disputing. Settlement's going away, but check out this feature, you can still bulk dispute. While that is true, you can do 500 at a time. It's still going to end up about 80% of your deductions you will have to individually dispute and provide the proof documents, unfortunately. All right, and so kind of next step in the process is, say you use the MDC, you're doing 500 at a time. Most of those get denied, unfortunately. This is where you go to the APDP individual disputing. And this is basically where you would search for a claim, provide details, and disputes. And so we provided snapshots here to show you what this looks like. Essentially, you would input, this deduction code for a code 22. You would search that and individually fill out all of the line items on that deduction and the other deductions there. That little box there, you're providing details on why you're disputing it. You're providing the dispute amounts and the proof documents that you hopefully have, that BOL, that POD, stuff like that. This is the part that is really manual. It takes, from what we've seen, about 15 to 20 minutes to do this entire process. That means research, collect the proof documents, and dispute each of these deductions. So you can kind of see how this starts to become a time suck. All right, and then kind of a general summary here over what's coming soon once you're no longer a settlement. On settlement, you're on individual disputing. What this means is that 80% of deductions that you're receiving, you're going to have to be prepared to dispute these individually. And what that means specifically is going into APDP, looking up those claim numbers, providing the proof docs, and disputing these one at a time. So, we talked pros and cons of APDP individual disputing, faster repayments, but it is more manual. We also wanted to carve out some time to talk how to prepare for the change. So I'm curious if y'all are listening here, go ahead, if y'all could chat and let us know have any of y'all been forced off of settlement yet? Have you seen the letters? Are you proactively switching to individually disputing, or are you kind of holding on as long as possible? So love your feedback there in the chat. Just curious. But with that, I will hand it back over to Eric to talk about how to prepare for this change.
Yeah, thanks, Weston. Like you said, big changes coming for those of you who've been accustomed to settlement disputing. One thing I'll throw out there, so Weston gave a little teaser of kind of what the dispute process in APDP looks like. Supplierwiki has done multiple webinars on the topic of actually disputing an APDP in a lot of depth. So if you are brand new to this process, I don't even know what APDP is, go to Supplierwiki and check out their APDP webinars and articles. There's a lot of good content there that we're not going to go as much into today, since we're mostly talking about the transition today. Yeah, checking out the chat, I see, somebody said officially off settlement. Using Deductions Navigator, disputing claim by claim, shout out. Cool. All right, so like we talked about, settlement going away, new dispute process for those of you who've been accustomed to settlement. So this section and the next are really targeted to those of you who are moving off of settlement and into this brave new world. So, for those of you making this transition, these are some things that we'll dive into as far as kind of preparing for what that means. Another thing I'm curious about for any of you on listening today who are currently on settlement and will be transitioning off, I'm really curious who at your company, person or people, are gonna kind of be responsible for managing this change. Is it falling within the accounts receivable department? Is this maybe your sales or customer service teams? And I'm curious who is sort of owning this. But yeah, a few things to keep in mind. Number one, you're going to have to plan for some new resources, whether that's existing folks, their time, how you're going to allocate it, or some additional help in this area, because like Weston called out, with this new process, even with this mass dispute creation feature, there's going to be a lot more time involved if you want to be recovering the same amount of money or more that you were recovering before. Obviously, this is a new process. You're going to be needing to think about training on what this process looks like. Big one we want to call out is getting buttoned up on your proof documentation. So because settlement mostly applied to shipping related deductions, with the settlement process, you usually didn't have to provide a ton of proof documentation, except when Walmart might sample a handful and say, hey, can you give me the BOL for this, or give me the POD for that? For those of you who are moving away from that world into individual disputing, you've got to start preparing for that if you aren't already prepared, by making sure your shipping documentation, bills of lading if you're collect, proofs of delivery if you're prepaid, packing lists, things like that are always good to have. Make sure you have that buttoned up, that it's available and easy to access, because that can make or break your success with this transition. And then lastly, we'll talk about this kind of at the end, but making sure that you have your cross-functional teams involved, because to get the most out of this new world, you're going to have to really be able to show on a case-by-case basis why you should be paid back. And if you're relying on just your accounts receivable team to do that, oftentimes they don't have the visibility into what might have happened for a specific order. And so having a cross-functional team in the process can make a big difference. So a couple things for your teams to be kind of getting up to speed on if you're new to all of this. First is some handy applications within Retail Link. There's kind of three that we call out here. Number one being the accounting scorecard. This is kind of a nice temperature check. So there's not a whole lot in this app in Retail Link. A lot of people don't even reference it very much, but it's a handy way to check on kind of the health of your EDI transactions with Walmart. So are your invoices being received or are they getting rejected? And what's the match rate of those invoices? So how accurate are your invoices with matching on Walmart side, or are they being kicked back? For those of you who are saying, hey, I sent an invoice and it's way past due and it still hasn't been paid, this is always the first place to go to check to make sure that those invoices weren't rejected for some reason and you need to correct them and resend them. APIS, the Accounts Payable Inquiry System. This is really a lot of your detail on everything to do with accounts payable, Walmart accounts payable. So all of your invoice detail, all of your checks, all of your claim information, like deduction information, is available here. So it's where you can go to pull all of that information up. It's not the easiest to navigate around in, and especially difficult to sort of see info in bulk, but you can find information on every individual invoice, just about every claim. All of your checks and check lines is available in APIS. Then lastly, like Weston talked about, APDP, Accounts Payable Dispute Portal. This is where you would go to submit disputes for those deductions or claims. Next, getting up to speed on this kind of new dispute workflow, what this is going to look like for your team. So like we talked about, if you guys are kind of getting your ducks in a row, who's going to own this? Really understanding what this process needs to look like. So what we always recommend is on a daily or weekly basis, this needs to be kind of a workflow that someone in your organization is running through. Because for most suppliers at Walmart, the volume of new deductions coming in is so great that if you don't stay on top of it daily or weekly, they can really build up and back up. And then you're kind of behind the eight ball and you have to make a lot of trade-offs that you'd rather not make. So for those of you accustomed to, say, a quarterly settlement, need to start thinking about adjusting your time frame for when you pay attention to these things to probably daily or weekly. So with this process, there's a research piece. So every deduction, hey, what actually happened? Do we owe this money or don't we? So there's that validity check. So digging into the backup information for each deduction, communicating with other teams when applicable, and understanding, is this a valid deduction or an invalid deduction? So invalid deductions get a lot of the attention because it's like, hey, that's my money, and you want to get paid back on those. So if it's invalid, organizing your proof documentation, different types of deductions require different types of proof documentation, getting that in order, and then filing that dispute, which Weston was talking about with the APDP app. On the other side of this workflow, and this is the side that gets ignored a lot, but what happens if we say, yeah, this is a valid deduction? Well, obviously your AR team has to, apply that. They got to write it off. But there's a really important piece at the end of this that a lot of suppliers neglect, which is, hey, how can we learn from this? So, if it's a valid deduction, if it's something with our terms or supplier agreement, maybe we expected this. Okay, not a big deal. Maybe you want to make some process changes, so you go ahead and give that, say, allowance up front rather than waiting for it to come across as a deduction. That's fine, that's a choice to make, but maybe it's a valid shortage deduction. We actually did ship short. How can we fix that? How can we make sure that our invoices always match what we ship? So that's where learning and communicating across teams can be really important. It helps your business plan for your cash flow. So that gets neglected a lot because individual disputing, when you move off of settlement, puts the focus back on single disputes. it's a big opportunity to start learning from these deductions more than you may have in the past. And then, beyond the dispute workflow, there's the post-dispute workflow. So what happens after we submit a dispute? This is going to be really new for those of you accustomed to settlement, but disputes either get approved or denied. So if it's approved, that dispute gets approved, that's great. You hopefully are getting paid soon thereafter. We usually see about 7 to 10 days to get paid back on an approved dispute. But sometimes those don't get paid. So you've got to have a process in place to make sure you're following up with Walmart if you see something approved but not yet paid back. On the denied side, if a dispute gets denied, you can redispute when you're going through the APDP portal. You're capped at 2 redisputes, so you can't redispute forever. You want to make them count, but yeah, you got to have a process in place for, hey, what do we do with our denied disputes? Who's reviewing these and making sure that, sometimes Walmart denies things and the reason they give is not really legitimate. So how can we catch that and push back? Follow-up processes on either side of that dispute resolution flow. And then lastly, prevention. So again, what are we doing once we kind of close the loop on a deduction? How are we learning from this? And how are we making sure that we save all of this data and documentation in case, say, we get audited on this later? And how can we maybe prevent, even if it was an invalid deduction, are there things that we can be doing to try to make sure that we aren't getting as many of these? We make it harder for Walmart to misreceive product, for example. So some new workflows to be thinking through as your team prepares for this change from settlement to individual disputing. We threw this one in here. So this was, a conversation. Obviously, we talk with suppliers all day, every day, and we talk with suppliers at every point in the process. These were some thoughts from a conversation that we had with the supplier about what their team was thinking about when they moved from settlement to individual disputing before they used SupplyPike. So at the very end of this, if you guys are interested, we'll talk about kind of how SupplyPike fits into all of this. But this was kind of where a supplier, where their thoughts were with this change. So one of the big things they were thinking about was, hey, how can we focus on kind of the winnable disputes the most? If we have limited human resources to put into this problem, can we be putting our resources where they're going to make the biggest impact? And part of that for them, because they were doing this manually with no software assistance or anything like that, was, it's not worth our team's time to go after smaller deductions. So if they had a $500 threshold, where if it's under $500, we're just going to write it off and move on. We'll talk about ways that you can eliminate that threshold and go after everything. But for them, at the time, it was a conscious decision to say, hey, if it's going to take us 20 minutes to research and dispute every deduction, we want to have a sort of rule in place where we focus on the big ones first. Next, timeliness matters, and this is always going to be the case, but the sooner you can get something off of your plate and back into Walmart's hands for review, the faster that process can go, the more likely you are to still have access to, say, shipping documents that you need, and the sooner you can be repaid. So, they really focused on how can we stay on top of these, make sure new stuff coming in doesn't sit on our plate for too long. We already talked about shipping documents, invoices, any of this documentation for your orders, having a process for making sure that all of your teams are saving that information and making it accessible across the company. So if your accounts receivable team is the team responsible for disputing deductions, make sure your accounts receivable team has a way to access your bills of lading that your warehouse is saving, for example. Another thing to be thinking about is creating tracking so that you can actually understand what's going on with new deductions coming in, and you can monitor, hey, are we seeing a big spike in these types of deductions, or are we seeing a big drop off in those others? Maybe there are certain items that are getting deducted more than others. The more data you can capture and store and kind of do analysis on these deductions, the better. They were thinking a lot about aging disputes, so you have a 2-year time frame that you can dispute a deduction. For those of you just coming off of settlement, that won't be a concern for for a while because you've settled all the historical stuff, but it is something to be thinking about. You can't just let a deduction sit undisputed forever. Eventually you lose the chance to go after it. Last one I'll talk about here is, they were talking about, hey, get help, get context. So two specific things they mentioned. There's a Facebook group called the Walmart Supplier Support Group. If you guys have never checked that out, it's actually a really cool resource. Suppliers coming together to share insights. And then do your best to connect with Walmart's accounts payable team. So, if you're able to make some contacts there, it's going to serve you really well in the future. So any context that you can get into why deductions may have happened are going to help you be more successful in both disputing them and winning them back, but also preventing them in the future. So education and context is a really big piece. All right. Seeing some questions come through that I think we're going to cover a little bit later in this, and some others that we can get to in the Q&A. So I think we're going to keep rolling. We threw this in here just for your team to have a checklist. So like Ali said, we'll be sending the deck out afterwards. This is, from our perspective, a checklist for your team to be monitoring and preparing for the change if you are getting ready to move from settlement over to individual disputing. So number one, if your AR team is going to be the ones handling disputes, make sure that they are fully up to speed on the process. So if they need additional training, if they need insights, use resources that you have available to you. So you guys are here on a Supplierwiki webinar. I mentioned Supplierwiki has a ton of great content on this process. SupplyPike, we really focus on education. So we'd love to be a resource for you just to educate and train on here's what this looks like. Mentioned the Walmart Supplier Support Group on Facebook, another great resource there. But whoever is going to be handling the disputing process at your company, start now. Start training them on how this is going to work, so that when the change comes for your company, when you get the notice that you're moving off of settlement, you're going to be prepared. Number two, do you have the people or the resources in place to handle the additional work? So like we talked about, if you're accustomed to settlement, creating one spreadsheet once a quarter or whatever time frame you're on and just sending that over, this new world is going to be more work. So individual disputing just takes a significant amount of time. And do you have the people or the assistants in place to handle that? If not, start preparing for that. With hiring, there's ramp up, there's cost. So starting to start those conversations to get those resources in place. Again, an understanding of kind of the intersection of deductions, fines, audits, how they fit together, what applies to this new dispute process and what is handled through other processes. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning of this webinar. Next, your cross-functional team. So does your customer service team or your transportation team and folks in the warehouse, do they have visibility into these deductions and fines? That's going to make your life a lot easier. Number one, because each of those teams probably has a unique perspective into certain types of deductions, why they occurred, how you can fight them. But number two, when there's visibility across the organization, we see this so often, it only does good things. It helps your team understand when or why issues are occurring, and it helps you put things in place that can prevent some of these in the future. So not everything's preventable, but if you give that visibility to multiple teams rather than keeping it siloed, say just in accounts receivable, you can improve your overall business, prevent some of these, dispute them faster, only does good things for your organization. Next, we talked about this one, digitize all your potential proof documentation. So if you're collect, make sure your bills of lading are digitized, searchable, easy to be called up when you need them. If you're prepaid, make sure you're able to get PODs, proofs of delivery, from your carriers or your 3PL. Things like pick lists or packing lists are not necessarily like the end all be all for proof, but they are really helpful information, as well as a way to get a file of your invoice or your purchase order. Those types of things can also be really helpful in your disputes as well. So make sure that for common types of proof documentation, you have a really easy way to get at them quickly. Otherwise, you're going to drag out the process a lot. Next, there's a big difference in the cash application between disputing individually and the old settlement process. So your accounts receivable team needs to be preparing for that change. With settlement, most teams would write off deductions as they occurred. And then when you get your one big settlement for, say, the quarter, it would come across from Walmart in a lump sum payment. So they would apply that with a journal entry or whatever they did and be done. With this new world, it's not going to work that way because every deduction that gets paid back will get an individual payback. So this $200 deduction will get a $200 payback, and so on and so forth for however many hundreds or thousands of deductions you receive. So there's going to be a new process for how your AR team handles these, and you need to get that in place. Are we leaving those invoices open until a deduction gets paid back? At what point do we kind of give up hope and close it out? There's a big change there coming, so getting in front of that. Lastly, and this really kind of applies to all, but what are you allocating to deductions? Because this is kind of a continual flowing thing. Receive a deduction, dispute it. Receive a deduction, dispute it, rather than a big quarterly settlement. What are we doing with things like year end? How, from an accounting perspective, accounting process, how are we handling that? And lastly, how are we going to learn from these deductions and minimize them? For the more forward-thinking suppliers, how can we not just fight fires, but how can we try to prevent some fires too? Who is going to be responsible for learning from and owning the process improvements? Which team is going to own that? So checklist there for your company as you're preparing for this change. And kind of lastly on this topic, if you want to go ahead and move off of settlement and not wait for Walmart to kind of force your hand on, sometime between now and May 1st, you are able to request to be moved off. Information on this slide for how you do that. Basically, send an email, follow up on the email if you need to, but you can request to be moved off of settlement early. And this has been the process for years and years. But if you don't want to wait and be told, you can go ahead and proactively make that switch and kind of control your destiny in that sense. All right. Last section, and I kind of wanted to end on a high note here. So, as we've been talking through this change, obviously we've talked about how it's, number one, change is hard. Number two, and this specific change is going to introduce a lot more work if you want to recoup the same amount of dollars that you used to on settlement. So it's been a little bit gloomy, and I wanted to kind of end with a positive. And I want to point out there's a real strategic opportunity here for the suppliers who have been accustomed to settlement disputing. There's a lot of benefits to this new process. And here at SupplyPike, in almost every scenario, we have coached suppliers that individual disputing is a better way to handle these types of deductions if you've got some help to be able to handle the volume. But big opportunities here. Number one, with settlement, typically you were working on a quarterly time period, and you had to wait until that time period was closed and every open invoice was paid, which meant you could be months and months and months behind in getting deductions paid back. So with this new world, there is no waiting. You can dispute a deduction as soon as it's received, so you can get paid back faster. So big opportunity there. In that sense, like I said, faster disputing, the sooner you can get the dispute submitted, the faster it can get paid back. Walmart's time for reviewing disputes varies. So we see the average dispute review time kind of ebb and flow over the course of the year. Right now, with so many suppliers moving off of settlement, Walmart's a little backed up. What we're seeing on our side is an average dispute review time of about 45 to 50 days, which is longer than normal. But the faster you submit disputes, the sooner they're going to get reviewed and approved. Next, and this is a really big one in terms of difference between settlement and individual disputing. With individual disputing in this new world, you can recover every dollar that you're owed. Settlement was always a handshake, always a kind of meet you in the middle type arrangement. With individual disputing, yes, it's tougher because you have to prove every claim was invalid. But if you do that, you can recover more money. And we consistently, time and time again, saw suppliers disputing individually. If they were able to keep up with the volume and sort of play by the rules, they were able to recover more money than they were on the settlement program. So big opportunity here to go after more dollars than you had been able to in the past. And then the last two really go together. So with settlement, we saw so many suppliers using settlement as a means to just kind of keep their head above water so that deductions didn't have to be a distraction, so to speak. With this new process, if you're going to recover all your money, you are going to have to invest in being able to do that, either the time or the assistance to do that. But it's going to also pay dividends, not just in more money, but better visibility into your business. Deductions are always signals, something we talk about here at SupplyPike. A deduction, whether it's valid or invalid, is always a signal about your business. And if you're paying attention to those signals, you can learn and improve. So if you are taking advantage of those learnings, you can improve your business to either reduce the inflow of new deductions, to maybe renegotiate a supplier agreement with Walmart, to work to structure your business to supply product the way Walmart expects, and make it easier for them to give you all of your money. So big opportunity here for you to make sure that you're getting every dollar, that you're getting it paid back faster, and that really your whole business is improving, not just the accounting side, but all the way upstream to your transportation team, your customer service team. A lot of data to learn from with this new process. Obviously, there are some challenges to that. Number one being just the volume, like we talked about. With disputing individually, you're not kind of making one fell swoop type moves. So volume is a challenge for most suppliers. There's some complexities to the research and disputing process. Walmart is always evolving, the rules kind of change. So navigating those complexities can be tough. It's tough to access granular data as well. So we talked about some of those applications within Retail Link. You can get to granular data, but it's tough to get it from there into a more usable format. And because of that, it can be hard to get insight into root cause. And lastly, we've talked about this one a lot, but cross-team communication is going to be new for a lot of suppliers who've been accustomed to the settlement process. So that can be a barrier as well. So because of those barriers, we recommend what we call kind of a two-pronged approach for those of you who are getting ready to enter this world of individual disputing. Number one, we recommend external sourcing. There's a lot that goes into this, and most suppliers aren't able to keep up with it without some help. So this is where things like software and automation can play a huge role in helping you keep up with the volume and be able to be more proactive rather than reactive with these deductions. We talked about third-party education, guidance. There's a lot of information out there that you can learn from other suppliers and other experts in the space. And if you're not going to be investing in those types of tools, then you've got to be thinking about how you're going to staff up to be able to handle this. There's always trade-offs to hiring more people. They're just not going to be as efficient, but we say you've got to do kind of one or the other. And then we've already talked about the internal processes, but no matter what, there's some stuff that your team's got to be preparing for here. So creating systems to store information, communicating action plans with your teams, and utilizing the free resources like Supplierwiki that are out there for your teams. All right. Yeah, that was a lot of information. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but want to spend some time just answering questions. I've been seeing the Q&A in the chat blowing up as we've been talking here. So yeah, Weston, let's dive into some Q&A, and you guys continue to ask questions. Throw them in the Q&A section and we'll do our best to get to them. Gonna go ahead and do one here that I see. The question is, if a dispute is approved, but it does not get paid, who do we contact at Walmart? So this does happen from time to time. We mentioned it in that workflow for kind of your post-dispute workflow. If you see a situation where a dispute was approved and it's been more than about 10 to 14 days and it has not shown up on a check, that's where you need to reach out to Walmart and sort of nudge them to get paid back. What we recommend is reaching out to EBS first. So I believe that contact information was on an earlier slide. EBS has an email address and a phone number. Phone number can be a little quicker to talk to a real human. And that's usually your first step. There's occasionally, if you have access to an individual within Walmart AP, that can be a great way to expedite the process. But by and large, starting with Walmart EBS, their Enterprise Business Solutions, I believe it stands for, is the first stop for saying, hey, this dispute got approved, hasn't been paid yet. When can we expect that? Have your claim number ready for that, as well as the case ID from the APDP application, so you can provide that to them and they can dig into it. Good question here. All right, I saw another one, a couple questions about SupplyPike specifically. So for those of you who are SupplyPike customers, yeah, don't want to introduce any confusion here. So one question is, so are we not going to use the SupplyPike application anymore? For those of you who use SupplyPike, there's a zero change for you with this. This information really is geared towards suppliers who use Walmart's settlement program in the past and are moving away from that. So here at SupplyPike, what we do is we build software that helps with this and other types of revenue loss. So our software is really built for deductions to automate the process of researching, proving, and disputing these types of deductions. We have always utilized the individual disputing process for the reasons we mentioned earlier: faster payback, going after every dollar, and because our software isn't limited by things like the volume of work and the difficulty collecting data and proving why things are invalid. So that's why I say at SupplyPike, we're really, we believe in individual disputing. So suppliers who utilize SupplyPike have been doing this all along. So yeah, good question there. Those of you who are SupplyPike customers, no change. This is geared towards folks who are using settlement and not disputing individually previously. Right. Other questions? Another question on that topic. On one of the earlier slides, we mentioned that you had two processes, either individual disputing or settlement. Looks like another SupplyPike customer who said, "Isn't there a third option? Can't we use SupplyPike?" Yes, the reason that wasn't on the slide, what SupplyPike does, we automate that individual disputing process. So it's not exactly a third separate process. We're automation that utilizes the existing individual disputing process at Walmart. So if you're using SupplyPike, you're already doing individual disputing.
Something I answered, but I wanted to point out, make sure everyone saw, was I saw Nikki asked, they're finding that takes about 3 months by the time when you click disputes, takes about, for them on average, about 3 months for Walmart to get around and approve or deny deductions. Question was, is there anything they can do to expedite the turnaround time? So this is tricky because I wanted to let everyone know that for 2022, we saw an average review time for Walmart to review deductions submitted. Took about 40 days before they reached a final status of either approving or denying a deduction. But unfortunately, that 3 months that they're experiencing, that's not unheard of, because specifically towards the end of the year of 2022, we saw that 40-day wait time going up to upwards of 55 days, somewhere around there. So 3 months is a little long, but unfortunately that might be the new normal for a while. I'm theorizing at this point, but I think Q4 slowed down significantly because of the holidays, but also because as settlement is ending, more and more suppliers are going on individual disputing, which I think is creating more of a backlog for Genpact to work through. So these longer wait times might be the new normal for a little bit while Walmart is figuring out how to deal with getting everyone over to individual disputing. That's more of a theory, to be fair, but I think that 40-day wait time will go up for the foreseeable future. But the question was, is there anything they can do to reduce that wait time? Unfortunately, there's not a lot, because once you click disputes, it's in Walmart's court to review it. But you do set yourself up for the most success by making sure when you dispute, you have all of those documents we talked about today there and ready for Walmart to review, because that reduces the amount of time it goes back and forth between you and Walmart. So make sure you have all those proof documents ready to go and attached to those disputes. And again, SupplyPike, this is kind of where we come in and can automate that process and make sure that all those documents are attached. And then also, if you are just like, oh my gosh, this is taking 100 days, I'm waiting on, $50,000 here to either be approved or denied. We have heard that calling Walmart EBS can help them review those a little bit faster. So success there may vary, but worth calling out. Wanted to answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Weston. Good call outs. And like you said, making sure you're totally buttoned up before you submit the dispute is one of the most effective things you can do. And the other, like we mentioned, is the sooner you get that disputed, it's going to take how long it's going to take to be reviewed. So the sooner that dispute gets submitted, the earlier payback could come. Like we mentioned earlier, we do see Walmart does have an auto approval process, and we do see some disputes get auto approved. That's that 19% number that Weston spoke to earlier. On average, across all disputes that we've seen through the accounts payable dispute portal, we've seen roughly 19% get auto approved. So those you would get a judgment instantly, and that's great. You get a little bit of payback up front. But the rest do fall into that manual review process, and that's where it can take a while. I saw another question in here about echoing that comment. It can take a couple of months, 2 to 3 months to first response. With the migration of suppliers from settlement to APDP, can we now expect that response time to go even longer? Yeah, Weston, you talked to this, speculating here, but I wouldn't be surprised. We've already seen it stretch out from, what's typically around 40 days on average to more than that, closer to 50, 55. I think we're going to have some growing pains still over the next few months where all suppliers are going to see a little bit longer review times with this migration. So a question on here. I'm going to save those SupplyPike questions to the very end. So those of you who want to stick around, we're actually going to do a quick walkthrough of the SupplyPike application if you're not familiar with it. You guys can stick around and we'll answer some of those. Saw a question, can we dispute larger claims individually and then use the mass dispute creation for smaller claims? Can we use both of them in parallel? So that's a really good question. The answer is yes, kind of. You can absolutely use mass dispute creation and individual disputing. In fact, you kind of, if you're using mass dispute creation, you're going to have to use individual disputing to get the most back. One thing I'll say is it's not very easy to sort of cherry pick like that with the mass dispute creation. In that process, essentially what you do is you put in a time frame of up to 10 days, and it'll show you all the claims from that time frame, just like claim number, claim amount. So you can multi-select from that list, but there's not an easy way to say, hey, show me all the small ones, and then I want to individually dispute the big ones. What we've seen some suppliers do is go ahead and submit them all. And because with mass dispute creation, you get kind of that instant judgment. If something's going to get denied, it's going to get denied pretty much right away, and then you can take care of it from there. So yeah, probably how I would approach that if you're doing this by hand and not using software like SupplyPike. Saw another question saying, is APDP the only option that Walmart offers for disputes? Do they offer something more automated for their larger suppliers? Previously, settlement was kind of that more automated process, and that's what they are taking away. So to our knowledge, we haven't heard of anything for disputing now besides going through APDP. So all disputes are flowing through that, whether you're doing it manually yourself in APDP or you're utilizing a third-party automation like SupplyPike. Every dispute is flowing through that APDP process now. We're not aware of any other process, regardless of the size of supplier. Another question, general Retail Link question. Shauna, I saw you having some issues staying logged in. I'm assuming this is Retail Link saying the server was down. We were seeing that too yesterday. Retail Link had a bit of a lie down for several hours. Weston, I believe, by the afternoon, it was back up and kicking. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, it looked like it was back up yesterday mid-afternoon.
Okay. Yep. So do see that from time to time. Just a little bit of outage here or there with Retail Link, but I think it's back now.
Yeah, it varies there. I was going to say on that, it's either Retail Link will sometimes be down or specifically APDP, the disputing portal. So between those two, yeah, that can really be annoying, but it does happen from time to time. It seems to clear up around the holidays. They don't seem to push too many changes to break it, but we might start seeing a little bit more now that we're in the new year, and they might be rolling out new stuff more and more, which might lead to more outages.
Got it. Yeah. One question from earlier, I saw somebody saying APDP won't allow us to create disputes for invoices that haven't been paid yet. So what do we do if we have an invoice that we transmitted and hasn't been paid at all? It's a really good question. With Walmart, we mentioned that accounting scorecard application. The first thing I would do is pull up the accounting scorecard app in Retail Link, check that invoice number to make sure that it was actually received. So you'll be able to see a list of rejected invoices. Make sure it's not in that list, because that list means that you're going to have to go back with your EDI team or EDI provider and retransmit that invoice because Walmart didn't get it in the first place. If you do, like say you go into, it's not in that list and you go into APIS and you look up that invoice and it's there and it just hasn't been paid for one reason or another, my next step would be to reach out to EBS, that contact email or phone number that we mentioned earlier, and just say, hey, we've got this invoice number, it's way past due. When is this going to be paid? Usually they can connect you with somebody in Walmart AP to take care of that. Another question about APDP, is there a way to get around the 10-day max period for searches? I'm assuming that means with the mass dispute creation. I'm not aware of one. You can search by specific claim numbers to look up one by one. Other than that, I believe the time frame is the only search option. Is that correct, Weston?
Yes, yeah. If it's not appearing in the MDC search, you'll likely, I want to say, have to individually look those up and dispute those individually.
Yeah. Then the second part of this question, I think, is talking about the homepage in APDP. The homepage shows you outstanding disputes, and it has a limit where it'll only show you 5,000 of the most recent ones. So if you've submitted 10,000 disputes over the past year, you're only going to see 5,000 of them in that list, which can make it really tough to understand where things stand. Unfortunately, that's, I think, just kind of the limit of APDP. So one thing you can do, again, you can search for individual claims or individual invoices to kind of find details if it's no longer showing up in that list of 5,000. But that does make it tough for sure. So, all right, we've got a few more questions in here that are related specifically to SupplyPike. So I want to jump into that with the last 5 minutes or so that we've got. But before we do that, I want to throw this out there. Weston and I are, we exist to do this kind of stuff. We build products and answer questions and talk to suppliers and kind of do our best to help you guys win at retail. So winning at Walmart. If you have questions that didn't get answered today, or something new pops into your head after the webinar is over, feel free to reach out to us. That's our real email address on the screen. Don't make us regret it and like sign us up for some random email list, but yeah, definitely reach out to us with questions, comments, anything like that. If we don't know the answer, we'll do our best to find somebody who does. But yeah, definitely want to hear from you. And with that, for those of you who've stuck around, looks like most people are still here, which is awesome. If you want to take a look at SupplyPike's solution in this this topic, yeah, let's dive into that. So like I mentioned, SupplyPike, we're a software company. We build software that helps make it easier to do business at the major retailers. So for Walmart, we focus on things like deductions, like we're talking about today. So we will dive into a short demo of what that looks like. I saw a few questions in the chat, and we'll kind of answer those as we go through. But this is SupplyPike's Deductions module, and this is tailor-made specifically for all of these deductions that you're receiving that we've been talking about today. So things like shortages, allowance claims, returns, anything that's coming across from Walmart's accounts payable department is getting pulled into this application. So what we do is we pull information daily from Retail Link. We connect into carriers and 3PLs and systems like that. So we can aggregate data, not just about your deductions, but also about your purchase orders, your invoices, your checks, your shipping documents, your picking list or pick list, pack lists. We're pulling that information daily and stitching it together because it all lives out there somewhere, but it's never all together in the same place where you can actually make sense of it. So we're pulling all of that together for the purpose of, number one, automating disputes when you have something you should be paid back for. And number two, giving you insight into what actually happened and helping you learn from it. So today we've been talking a lot about how can you learn from the signals that deductions provide. That's a huge part of what we do because we believe there's so much that can be learned and that you can use to improve your business. So SupplyPike's going to give you a dashboard with dashboardy things showing the state of your business as it relates to these types of deductions, where they stand in the dispute process, things like breakdowns by claim codes and how much different types of deductions are costing you, and all the other dashboardy things. So insight is a big piece of what we're providing there. But where the rubber really meets the road is all of that granular data that's so hard to access in bulk. We provide that to you in one view, in one click. So every single deduction that has occurred, you can get detailed information on that. You can search, filter, sort, slice, dice any way you want to view this information. And you can even export it into Excel to do even deeper analysis if you'd like. But this makes it really easy to do powerful analysis like, hey, how many deductions has this item received in this time frame? Because I know we made a packaging change, and did that reduce our inflow of new shortages? Those types of questions you can answer in seconds with SupplyPike. And then, like we said, on the individual disputing process, SupplyPike utilizes the individual dispute process we've been talking about today. So I know we had a question, hey, if we dispute something through SupplyPike, does it appear in APDP? Yes, yeah, we don't have like a special path where we can pipe things, into some special person at Walmart. We play ball exactly like they want you to. So we utilize the accounts payable dispute portal. Your disputes that you initiate in SupplyPike get submitted straight to APDP. So we're pulling all that information together and we're using it to do analysis like, hey, was this valid or was this invalid? We give you detailed information about not just the claim, but the order that it stemmed from in the invoice. We show you what Walmart says they received for that shipment. And then we're pulling in your proof documentation to prove what actually got delivered. So in this example, we're looking at a deduction for a shortage. And we're saying, hey, we looked at your advance ship notice, and it looks like you shipped the same number of units that you invoiced for this item. And Walmart says they didn't receive any, but we pulled in a bill of lading that shows that you did ship everything. And since this is a collect shipment, a bill of lading proving that you shipped everything is what you need to be paid back. So we aggregate that instantly. And what your team can do is then come in here and submit a dispute for this. So that disputing process, your team can initiate, or you can put it on total autopilot and the application will initiate those on your behalf. So full automation for the disputing process. So better data visibility, automated disputing, kind of all the things we talked about today. We take off your team's plate, and instead your team can focus on the real strategic impact of how can we improve our business, and the software takes care of getting paid quickly, getting paid the maximum amount, and serving up the data for your team to utilize. So 5-minute overview of the software. But if you have questions about that, absolutely reach out to us here at SupplyPike. We'd love to do an in-depth demo. And it's really easy to show you your company's data in the software. So within a couple of days, you can be up and running and take a trial of the software with your own data in here. So without becoming more salesy, I'll stop it there. But yeah, great questions today. And Weston, that was fun. Thanks for walking through the settlement to individual disputing change.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sticking around.